Or whatever you use for the internet chain updated, unbeknownst to me.
So did mine. Mine updated and it took about 30 minutes.
Yeah, mine just did the same thing, so sorry.
All right, you are live now.
Computer, whatever you use for the internet chain updated, unbeknownst to me.
So did mine.
Hazen, would you like to start?
Yes, sir, I'd be happy.
Mine updated and it
Viewing
took
our budget.
about 30 minutes.
All right, so Mr. Mayor, members of the board, this is our 5:30 meeting. We had a work session last week. We got what we felt like were just direction from the board, and the staff went back and worked on it. And I want to go over with you the changes we made to the budget. There was also a request that you guys wanted to hear from the department heads about some of the things that they either felt like were important in the budget and got cut out, or you know, other things that they see going forward for the budget. I would also recommend that we do some type of mini conference in the fall. We've done those periodically in the past. I think would probably have good, this one would be very helpful. So here's what we did. What's in the budget that will be presented tonight at the public hearing. So one of the things the board asked us to do was not appropriate any fund balance. So at the last budget you saw had about $236,000, and the board said we would like to appropriate no money from the general fund. So here's how we got back to zero. In that budget that the board saw, we had a 3% merit pool that began would go into effect July 1st, 2020. And after listening to the discussion of the board, we amended that so that the 3% raise would go into effect January 1st, 21. And that saves about $174,000. Then the other thing we did several other things. Workers' comp, we budgeted a significant increase. We had not received proposals back. We received proposals back, so we reduced the premium. It's still an increase, but it's not as significant as we thought it was going to be. So we're able to reduce workers' comp by $33,000. And then we also reduced property and liability premiums increased by $12,000. We also, the consensus of the board was not do a raise or increase your salaries to $7,000 and do away with the technology allowance, which would essentially been a wash, by the way, but it may not be good optics. So we chose, in this budget, what you're seeing is that we kept the board's salaries at $5,200, and then we also put back into the budget the technology allowance.
So Hazen, that number 5 and 6 in your email today they cancel each other out. Is that accurate?
Essentially, I mean, it's not necessarily to the penny, but well, you know, it's an $1,800 reduction in your salary, well, non-raise in your salaries, and that money goes into the technology allowance because it's an annual, it's by term, it's a by term appropriation of $3,600 per term. Okay.
Yeah, got it. Thank you.
And then the last thing I did was the library revenue. I did not budget any money, even though, in fact, I got an email today from the library folks. We fully expect to get money. And as a balancing number, I put in $23,000. They are, I don't know if they'd call them difficult, but I expect to get more than that, but I'm comfortable that that represents about $1.50 per square foot. I'm very comfortable we'll get at least that, and we intend to get twice that much, which would be about $3 a square foot. And then on the tourism side, Commissioner Urban pointed out that Food Truck Friday, because we're going to beef that up next fiscal year because we didn't do it this year, And so we needed to add $12,000 to Food Truck Friday, which we'll have one in the fall. We'll do some in the fall and then next spring as well. And so that adjusted the tourism fund by $12,000, not a big deal, but so we were able to balance the general fund with zero appropriation fund balance. So happy to answer any questions that the board may have.
I'd like
Commissioner
to
McCool.
ask about number 2, because I thought we were going to come back in January and discuss what the economy looked like and then discuss the 3% merit.
That was my exact question too. I think that was what the board had suggested, so that really threw me off.
So I apologize. I did not come away with that clearly. I would say that my recommendation would be to leave it in the budget, and then in December we could come back and have a discussion about, are you comfortable with the economy? I will, just as an overall argument, what's interesting about these times is these are the very times that 70% of our workforce has been going, 70% of workforce has been going full blast into this COVID situation as first responders.
And also too, Hazen, and I talked to the mayor about this, this week, Charlotte Mecklenburg voted to give their employees a 3% raise across the board, everybody. And I think I've heard from a couple other places. I want to think Pineville is going to do the same too, but we postponed this for this time, and I was under the impression that we moved it to January, that we would give this raise, this 3% to our employees, the essential ones. That was my understanding as well. Some other towns have already given their 3% already in hopes of what it come to look like now, just because those were the frontline people who were working during this pandemic crisis.
Commissioner McCool.
My personal, I don't know how the board thinks, but I think it would be, if you put it in the budget and then we come back in December, employees are going to be banking on this 3% increase. And so we come back in December and say, no, we can't do it now. I think that's way worse for the employees than if it's not in the budget at all. I mean, because then it's a bonus if you get it, but if you're already budgeting for it, it's already in the budget. I mean, I don't know. I don't know how everyone else feels, but I'd rather not have it in there and then give it than have it in there and then take it away.
Any other commissioners want to weigh in? Commissioner Bland?
Yeah, I've been concerned about our, revenue stream, and I'm just concerned. We talked a lot about all these additional monies and funds we're going to have coming in because of the Republican convention that's coming in here. And of course, then I'm seeing there's a dispute between the governor and the president about whether or not he wants to actually come to Charlotte or not. Well, how's that going to affect us if he reneges on what he said he was going to do? And we don't have that money coming in. How much is that going to affect us?
Right. So nobody's run any analysis on that. The bulk of that is tourism dollars, right? It's prepared food, the 1% prepared food tax, it's the hotel motel, it's the rental car. So I would say that's where the significant hit would be on the RNC now. But I will say, I don't know what the DNC did. If we got a bump up from the DNC 8 years ago, I've never heard any comment about sales tax going up because of a national convention.
Commissioner Miller.
The hazard pay was $3 an hour, correct, Hazen?
Yes,
And
sir.
that went out to all fire, EMS, and police for the 40 hours a week, let's say, that they worked.
So the short answer is yes, and telecommunicators, and it's $3 an hour for their shifts. So police is 42 hours a week, fire is 53 hours a week, telecommunicators, I think, are 42 hours a week as well. Okay. So those are the groups that got the $3. And that did, by the way, that did go, well, it went out of effect Friday night because we went into phase 2.
How many weeks total was that? About 8 or 10?
8. That's Tanya or Becky.
It began around March 19th.
Okay, so about 8. Well, I don't want to be mean or whatever, but for someone making $25 an hour, you're making $52,000 a year in round numbers. A $3 an hour raise during that time is a 12% raise for 2 months. And I'm very sympathetic to the people who either don't have a job or don't have a business or any revenue stream whatsoever. And I also remember that it was going to be revisited in January versus an automatic. However, I do appreciate your trying to save the monies as well.
So one of the things we could clearly do is the board would have the right. I would recommend keeping it in the budget because if you don't, you're going to have to find it. And then the board reserves the right, and we can make it clear, and we can make it clear to employees too, that this is not a guarantee, that the board will have to take action for you to get raises as of January 1st. I think it's within y'all's purview, and we can make that clear to employees.
So I guess I misunderstood. If we put it in the budget with an asterisk of needs to be approved at a later date, the monies are penciled in and we still have the decision-making power as long as we asterisk that. Is that correct?
Yes, and that is within your right. I mean, I would recommend giving those employees a 3% raise January 1st, but you guys have a right to do it a different way.
I understand entirely.
But if we don't have, if we don't reallocate those funds to another purpose, what's the process of refinding those funds, as you say?
Commissioner Garner, ask me that one more time. I want to make sure I understand the question.
If we don't include the 3% in the budget,
Okay.
But we don't repurpose it for another need, then what do you mean by we have to find that money again?
Well, okay, so everything's a projection. It's a revenue projection. I guess if the board said, okay, we take that $174,000 out, we could do a couple things with it. We could put it in contingency. We could put it in a line item under contingency, an expenditure line item under contingency. We could put it under, we could put it under building maintenance. That's a fund we're trying to build. You could put it under paving if you wanted to put it. I mean, paving is not at the levels we and our consultants recommend. I would leave it somewhere in the budget that can be identified, as opposed to going back and reevaluating revenues when you've already earmarked. Now, as part of the process before you go forward, you could say, okay, staff, let's see a revenue picture of what's going on with property tax, sales tax, state shared revenues. We could do that for you all. I don't know if I answered your question though.
I'd just like to say it was my recollection that it was the clear consensus of this board not to include a raise in January, but to reevaluate in January to see if we could afford one. So it would be my preference to remove it as an automatic raise in January and reevaluate at that time.
Agreed.
I agree too, but we need the monies identified rather than putting them back into something else.
Commissioner Urban.
Well, we were capping the fund balance 2 weeks ago. Why won't we just put the money back? And if we see and deem it worthy, we just tap the fund balance. I mean, we'll just use the opposite argument here, and to just point instead of a line item, we come back at it. Things are hunky-dory and cheerio, and we turn around and then tap the fund balance for the 236 or whatever that amount might be, or maybe the board considers it retroactive back to July 1st.
But right now, there's zero coming out of the fund balance, so it'd be in addition to the fund balance, Mr. Urban?
No, what Hazen originally proposed was, in order to make this year's budget balance, he was going to dip into the fund balance. What the directive of the board is to not do that, obviously in light of what the situation was. But we could come into January, all things being equal, not deal with the 174, as Renee and Ken pointed out and Dave pointed out, and we could go to the fund balance to make up that amount for the 3% merit pay. It's just a matter of which bucket you want to take it out of. I don't see where there's an issue there.
And everything y'all have talked about is within the board's discretion. My recommendation would be to put it into the contingency, $174,000 into contingency. And then you guys make a decision at that point, whether you want to activate contingency. So there'd be no, it would be it would be at y'all's discretion to whether or not you want to activate that contingency or not. If you don't want to activate the contingency, then it goes unspent and it rolls into the 22 fund balance.
I think that's a more palatable solution than giving the automatic raise. That's what I would be in favor of.
I support that.
Anybody else want to comment?
I support that too. I would like to talk about, and maybe this isn't the right time, but the $3 increase for frontline workers. I hadn't realized, I guess, that had expired. Is that something we're going to talk about continuing, or is that it's done? Like, is it done?
It's really, we could talk about it as a board. I mean, we felt really good when we did it. We got out ahead of it. I believe we were the first organization in the county to do that. A lot of folks didn't do it. Well, several towns did nothing. Did a little something.
I guess I'm bringing it up because our numbers in Matthews, or at least in 28105, are where they were a month ago. They went down, but now they're going back up to where they were April 20th. So, they're not necessarily in a safer place with the work they're doing. But I realized, that's not part of this next fiscal year's budget.
That is definitely true. The second part of that. The balancing act is thanking employees and rewarding them. And then, okay, how are we fiscally responsible? The governor did take us to phase 2. It is what it is in my mind, at least in the governor's view. We are progressing out of COVID. Now, if we went backwards, if we went back to phase 1, maybe that's what would trigger us back. Now, if it goes back to phase 1 after the fiscal year, we definitely got to come back to the board and say, where are we going to get this money? But my recommendation at this point is take the governor's lead. They feel like we've met enough of those benchmarks to go to phase 2. If something happens and we go back to a phase 1, that we would reinstitute it. But right now I would leave it without the $3 an hour raise. My recommendation, at least.
Hey, Hazen, how many employees does that entail? You told us before, but refresh our memory.
70%. I don't, can anybody do the numbers? Tanya, can you do the numbers?
I'm looking right quick.
Or maybe put it another way, what does it cost us per week or per month to have the $3 increase? How much additional?
I'm going to talk, Becky. Yeah.
It was around $21,000 a pay period, if I can recall correctly. It's been a few weeks since we've looked at it, but it was about $21,000 every 2 weeks.
Becky, didn't that exclude fringes? If for some reason I thought if we include fringes, it was like $28,000 or $29,000 every 2 weeks.
You're testing my memory now. Tanya's got that document. I'm sorry.
What does that mean, Hazen?
What do you mean? Plus fringes, or how much does that?
Yeah, fringes, what does that mean?
Well, that's going to be Social Security, retirement,
Okay.
FICA,
Okay, thank you. We can move on if we want while Tanya's looking that up. I suppose then we have, as a board, made the decision to put the 3% raise in a contingency fund for January through the end of the fiscal year, and we'll revisit it in January, correct?
And it's a clarification. I would recommend we revisit it in December, the meeting in December.
Fine, yeah, sure.
And, you may say, y'all may say, "Look, I need X, Y, and Z," so it gets revisited in January again.
Oh, that's fair. I think December, our last meeting, well, we only have one meeting in December, right?
Right.
Yes, sir, traditionally, yeah.
We should have a much better feel for how we're doing with the whole virus situation and everything in December for sure.
So Hazen, 78 employees were eligible to receive hazard pay between police and fire. And the cost, was around, to your point, without fringe was 21,000, or estimated to be 21,000. Obviously there's some fluctuation in there with overtime and different things. So then you add in the fringe and it would probably be around 25-ish. I'm happy to run the numbers and get you.
No, that's fine. I just wanted a ballpark. That gives us an idea if we were to continue it, how much it would cost.
Okay.
Around $100,000 a month, sounds like. Give or take.
No, well, that's it for 2 weeks. That 25,000 is for 2 weeks.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So 50. Yeah.
Okay, very good. Thank you. So Mayor Pro Tem Garner, we can revisit that at some point if you think that for some reason we wanted to continue that hazard pay.
I mean, I think it's worth a discussion, especially the way the numbers are looking in and around Matthews right now.
Can I ask Chief Kannenberg how many cases we have in Matthews?
Yes, you can ask that question.
Let's see. As of this morning, we had 45 town residences in isolation in 14 locations with outbreaks in Carrington and Royal Park skilled nursing facilities.
Aside from the two Royal Park and Carrington, how many residents, Rob, please?
And 12.
Okay, the reason I ask is because I would question spending $10,500 a week on 12 cases outside of nursing care facility or senior living community that already has their own medical staff.
But what were those numbers a month ago? What do you have those for April 20th or 21st?
I got it.
To be honest, I mean, the numbers have been relatively stable. Everybody who goes on the list rolls off the list 10 days later. And the 28105 zip code is much broader than Matthews, and it includes East Charlotte. So it's not an apples to apples, and we're testing more people daily, so the numbers are going to go up. It's, you know, the outbreak status in the nursing homes, and we're probably getting way too broad, but you know, they're the ones charged with dealing with it. Things have been put in place to give us information to lessen the risk. I'm not going to argue for or against the hazard pay. I think it was a good thing when we did it.
Yeah.
But you know, we knew we were only going to do it through this budget year because that's what money we had available. So phase 2 seemed like a good time to make that transition. And at the same time, we're bringing back the public works employees. We're opening town facilities. So we're trying to get back to life as normal.
So Rob, you just said something that I was unaware of. How many people live in Charlotte and have a 28105 address? Zip code.
28105 is roughly 50,000 people.
I did not know that. Wow.
So about 15,000 more than the population. And it gets Margaret Wallace Road. It gets a little bit up Monroe Road toward the Galleria.
So everyone that lives in Matthews proper has a 28105 zip code, but also there were about 15,000 others that don't live here. That's what you're saying, right?
Correct.
Today's a good day. I learned something. Thank you.
We had a little texting discussion, Chief, maybe it's Clark, Chief Pennington. As I understand it, Carrington may come off the list tomorrow because they're going to finish up their 14 days. Is that an accurate statement?
Probably not.
Okay. Okay.
But Royal Park posted 38 cases today.
They had 2 Friday. Or
So
3.
I think with the way they assign those is if they're outside of Mecklenburg County, let's say it was a Union County resident that was staying in, I got to be careful. I'm not going to say it. I think they're not real. They'll assign that to another county or another zip code if the person resides in that other zip code. I know they do that with deaths.
How long do residents stay at Royal Park? Is it just for rehabilitation or is it long-term nursing care? Does anybody know?
It's both. It's surgical rehab and it's skilled nursing, long-term care.
Just my opinion, but I think if someone's in long-term nursing care in Matthews, that number should count for Matthews. Even if they have a home in Union County or whatever, if they essentially live here.
That's not a 100% statement on my part.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little confusing when we look at the numbers sometimes because what bucket the people that have the virus are counted in. Okay, so I think we've covered that pretty well. Hazen, do you want to move on with, I guess we're going to talk to the department chiefs to
let me
get individual budget
board to make sure we're clear. So you're going to see is we'll go through and scrape all the items in the budget that are related to salary increases and fringe benefit increases. And that's going to equal $174,000 plus or minus. And then we're going to put that, you'll see that in a separate line item that'll say contingency. It'll be an expenditure, and then it'll be the board's discretion to deploy that number or not, with discussions beginning in December of 20.
Good.
So I think part of the discussion last Monday was, it kind of was a painful budget, right? And I think the question is, well, what didn't get into the budget that department heads felt like were very important? And so we sent out those there in different forms. Some of them are presentations, some of them are memos, some of them are bullet points. Apologize for that kind of different, that really kind of falls on me, and everything kind of came together at the last minute. So do any of the department heads want to volunteer?
Hazen, I think I would be most interested in hearing what items were really, really painful to cut, not just, nice to have, but were there things that were sliced from this budget that some of our department chiefs really, really wish they could get, then they think they're really important. I think that would be interesting to know.
Chief Kinneberg, do you mind starting this discussion?
How did you guess? Okay, so I think you have the presentation I put together. It's probably got way more information than you want. I appreciate all the council members for hearing me out last week and taking time to respond to my letter later. There's a couple things. We keep kicking around the term savings and belt tightening and cuts. And I think what has happened. Oh, thank you, Maureen. The department heads knew going in that this would be a tight budget, so we tightened our belt. We got in front of Hazen and we rearranged our priorities and made our case. But what the unintended consequence of getting none of the additional, the stipend eligible transition, the deputy chief or Idlewild money is the belt tightening made money go away that made the implementation of other things. Maureen, go ahead and just put the Zoom back up. If I'm not driving, I can't do this. By tightening the belt and then not getting, by tightening the belt to put money toward programs that we need, the thing we need didn't get funded and the money that was tightened disappeared as well. Does that make sense?
I'm not real sure what you mean, but did anybody else get that?
Just illustrate it.
I cut operating costs to fund, say, the volunteer transition to part-time. I didn't get the additional money to make the transition, and I also lost the money that I cut to try to make that happen, to make it more incremental and more easy to, an easier bite. But anyway, 4 things that we put in was the certification incentive. That's still in the budget. Thank you, Hazen. The transition to stipend eligible volunteers to part-time. Here's an example. The actual cost of that is $115,000. By belt tightening, we made the cost to implement that about $65,000. So that means about $50,000 in other things from the budget disappeared as well. And I think Mr. Urban mentioned to Becky somewhere along the way that we've got a safer incentive fund that was about $45,000. We took 15 of that to put toward doing the hiring that we have to do for the volunteers to become part-time. We also cut it about 15,000. So we went from 45,000 to 15,000 in the areas that incent our volunteers to participate, because we were moving toward a new kind of program. We didn't get the new program and we're 45,000 short. Does that help? Anyway, the certification program, the volunteer transition, that keeps us competitive with our neighbors. A lot of things going on in the fire service world that makes competition for volunteers very difficult. The deputy fire chief position, we cannot continue to go at the speed we're going without the administrative support to make that work. And the operating budget, here's another good example. So I cut my operating budget $3,500. Hazen cut my operating budget by $8,500. The operating budget is at its lowest point in 5 years, and it's $45,000 less than it was in 2017 when I became the fire chief. So there's not much more room to wring money out of the operating budget of the department. You don't have this slide, but I looked this up today. Over the last 10 years, the department has received $1,472,000 in grant money, funding from other sources that we will not receive again. So we've had somebody else supporting our department to the tune of about $150,000 a year. All those grants expire in 2021, or they finally expire in 2021. And the last thing I'll throw out is Idlewild. We had been funding them at $335,000 a year, including $40,000 toward a truck payment. We had intended to convert that capital toward operating. They cannot provide the level of service that we need without appropriate funding. So I would argue if there's a spare $40,000 in the budget, it needs to go to Idlewild to provide the level of service we need until we're ready to build and staff a Station 3.
Right.
So, any questions?
Commissioner Urban.
Chief, what's the dollar amount? It can be in a range, but what's the dollar amount in the cuts that you made in this last go round, including the 40K for Idlewild?
Can you repeat the question one more time?
What's the dollar amount in range for the cuts you made plus the 40K with Idlewild?
Almost about 100,000. I don't have that sheet in front of me, but that's a ballpark.
That's okay. The range is fine.
If you include capital, about 100,000.
Okay. And Idlewild.
Yes.
Chief, can you tell me like what the structure of your department is? Because after the last budget meeting, I started looking at other towns and who has a chief and deputy chiefs and captains. So we have you as a chief and no deputy chief. But how many captains do you have?
I have four captains, 3 lieutenants, 18 career firefighters, 49 certified and qualified volunteers.
And then what's a battalion chief?
That would be like a shift commander.
And how many shift commanders do you have? Is that?
None.
Okay.
Chief, typically a battalion commander is over more than one station though, right?
Right. Correct.
Okay. So in Charlotte, they may have
6 stations. 6 stations, 10 companies. For us, it would be, if we had that rank, it would be probably most advantageous to have a shift commander, somebody responsible for A, B, or C shift.
I mean, to compare us to Cornelius, they have a chief, 3 deputy chiefs, and 7 captains.
Yeah, but you're not comparing apples to apples.
Okay, what would be a town to look at that has
well, we're going to meet tomorrow, and I've got that list for you tomorrow.
Okay.
But the currently in Mecklenburg, Davidson, Matthews, and Mint Hill are the only 3 municipal fire departments.
Okay.
The others are independent corporations that contract with the town. So again, they're in as we've discussed as a group before, we're bound by a different set of rules as far as compensation and rank staffing and funding model. In an independent corporation, the board of directors for the fire department only has to worry about spending the fire tax money. They don't have to worry about funding parks, greenways, roads, police, festivals, and the fire department like you do.
Right.
Do any of the municipalities that that you mentioned, do they have a deputy chief? Mint Hill, Cornelius, or Davidson?
Mint Hill and Davidson.
And I guess what I would say, and Chief and I have talked about this, I mean, when I got here 17 years ago, it was a volunteer fire department with somewhere around 20 volunteers on the roster. And we have slowly progressed to where we're at today. And Chief's heard me say it a lot, is it's an incremental process. And we are much better, much safer than we were, much more protected than we were. I think for me, the most difficult part of cutting out of the budget was the volunteer stipend, because it's only $100 for a 12-hour shift. And we're competing against other of these part-time folks that are making from $12 to $15 an hour, and we're paying, if you did the math, it's like $8 an hour or something like that. And I think it's a credit to Chief Kinneberg's management style and leadership and training, but we really do. That's one of the primary things we need to do, is make this transition from this training ground that helps people go from what we're helping them do to make $15 an hour, and then probably eventually get on with Charlotte or somebody like that, or maybe Concord. And instead, we can, Chief may disagree, but we can reduce the number of folks we need, and we have part-time employees, and we make sure there's four on a shift. That's going to be more expensive, but it's a more sustainable model for the town.
Just like to make a comment here. I know it's tough, and there's been a lot of cuts and belt tightening, et cetera, but we've raised taxes for 2 years in a row prior to this year. And I just don't think it's acceptable to raise taxes every year. I mean, we have to give our constituents a break from continual raises in taxes. So I know it's tough, but I think necessary.
It's a great point. Becky and I talked to a couple of managers in Wake County, and they're going through a reval. And it was interesting for me to watch, and they actually share their tax rates and where they're going. And a number of them were proposing to raise taxes in a reval year. And Commissioner Miller has talked about this in the past. We all know our citizens have a very high expectation of quality of services. And historically, the staff has done a good job, very good job of doing that. A 28-cent tax rate compared to the services that our citizens are getting, in my opinion, we're running towards the end of that useful life. And I think the board has to start thinking differently about how we fund programs in town. And I do think a mini conference, let's say in October, will be a good start to really have kind of a heart-to-heart discussion about whether it's the fire chief, police chief, public works, so that you guys have full, and because, paving, right? The consultants say we need $1.25 million to keep us at a certain level, which we all get. And in this year, it's at $800,000, and that's $100,000 more than we've historically given, but that's still virtually a penny below what the experts are recommending.
Okay, would any of the other department heads like to speak? Chief Pennington?
Thank you, sir. I guess I just want to kind of reiterate what Rob was talking about. I mean, and just for your information, the way that this budget process kind of processed through was before the budget even got to Hazen, there were cuts at our level. Like we were looking at the budget as proposed by some of my division commanders of what they were looking for, what they needed to kind of progress forward. And we had to cut before it even got to Hazen. So I did provide you guys with a memo that kind of outlined some of the cuts and some of the changes that we had to do after it got to Hazen. And then the back of that memo, and I don't want to hit each individual point, we did cut 2 corporals out of our stratified policing model that we needed to kind of help balance this side out. But also I want to remind the board that we've gone through 2 very in-depth professional reviews of our organization to identify our staffing needs and the needs of the organization to progress forward in our crime fighting strategies. And those 2 studies have both shown the staffing increases. Now, there were no requests for additional staffing this year because, we knew, as I think Rob's term was, tightening the belt, right? So we were tightening down knowing that this was going to be a very tough budget year. But as far as my vision side of it, we received those 2 professional reviews of our organization. I think they were very well done. They were both presented to the board, and things that we need to think about moving forward, that as the town continues to grow and as these 3 apartment complexes come out of the ground and as the additional housing starts to come up and the additional traffic starts to hit the town, we're going to continually see pressures that are going to come against your police, fire, public works, parks and recs. All of the departments are going to see these pressures. So we did a lot of budget cutting before it got to Hazen, and I think Hazen did a great job at taking our immediate needs, our long-term visions of each departments, and trying to balance those. So the point I guess I'm trying to make is we've all made cuts significant from the original budget presented to Hazen was about including the crime scene technician that, our organization is just starving for. The fact that we don't have an individual professionally trained to go out and process major crime scenes has been a problem in the past. I'm talking several years ago, was a significant problem for our organization in prosecution of cases. So we've taken some steps in the last couple of years to fix that, which is entering into a memorandum of understanding with CMPD that they would come out when available to help us with our major crime scenes. Unfortunately, crime is on its way up regionally and nationally, violent crime. So Charlotte has not always been available to send out that crime scene tech to kind of help us process. The latest one I can tell you about, we had a homicide here in Matthews that took over 3 hours for their crime scene tech to arrive, which had my detectives, my officers, the street shut down. I did have commissioners texting and emailing asking, hey, when's the street going to open? But we couldn't do anything until we got the crime scene processed, which really did handcuff us a little bit there. So that's another area that we cut. We had originally budgeted $30,000 as kind of a slow walk into this process where we would be able to contract with an outside professional trained individual to be our crime scene tech on call and pay them piecemeal. That had to get cut. And we're going to go back to having our detectives. And remember, I have 5 detectives in our general investigation section that when we have a homicide, it takes 5 detectives to interview witnesses, run down leads, start gathering video, but I have to pull 1, 2, sometimes even 3 of those or a patrol officer to start processing and collecting crime scenes. So those are one area. I guess those are several areas, that we've talked about that we've had to cut. We get it. It's a tight budget year, but if we want this professional service, we do need to start progressing forward in those areas.
Thank you.
CJ, you want to speak next?
Can I interject a question for the chief before we move on? I'm sorry, I was muted.
Sure.
Thank you. Chief Pennington, your budget for the new fiscal year started at 7.5 million. Is that what you show, or what did the revised version come in at?
Hazen, can you answer that? I don't have that budget sitting in front of me, the proposed.
Let me see.
I show 7.5 million as the proposed fiscal year 21. I'm just wondering.
Proposed, and that would have probably been my request, yes. Now, remember, the recommended, I believe, is the next line item that myself, Becky Hazen, and Beth worked through. There are 2 cars cut out of that. Typically, we're at 7 cars. Remember, we added 4 employees last year. We're going to see a need to replace cars or add cars to the fleet. We ended up cutting 1 car out of CID and 1 car out of patrol. So that brought down, I want to say, our savings of close to $80,000.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Chief Pennington?
I'm sort of
CJ?
waiting for Hazen to see if he can find that. I'm sorry, I can ask it at the next meeting if you'd rather, Hazen.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to give it to you, Jeff, because I don't have the requested budget. So what happens, the requested budget comes in from the department head, it gets shown on a worksheet right here, but it's broken down by division. So I'm gonna have to go back and get requested and then recommended, which is the one that we vet. So I can, if you guys will let me send that out to you, whatever, today or tomorrow, tonight or tomorrow, I can do that.
Thank you.
Move on to CJ.
Hey, everybody. Thanks. I don't want to pile on, so I'm just going to go over it real quickly. But I do want to reiterate just the process that we go through before it even gets to you. If you look at what I had cut out, you can see I cut out, and not all of it was realistic, but I cut out over $300,000 of my budget before it got to Hazen. Then Hazen cut out another, I think, $100,000 before it even got to you. So that I just want everybody to realize that when the budget gets to you, we've already gone through it several times, taking into account, you know, the economy, where we think things are going. One kind of surreal thing is I found a budget report from 1999, and I was flipping through it, and at that time we had, I think, like I don't know, 20,000 citizens, and Public Works had 34 personnel. We're now at 33,000 people roughly, our population, and we are at 33 people in our department. So we actually have less people now than we did, 11, 12 years ago. And the amount of projects and things that we do now are huge compared to what we did before. So just wanted to point that out. I think two of the real important things that we did cut out are positions. The facilities maintenance position right now, Albert, and a new technician that's being hired now, they are barely keeping up with the facilities as they are. They do not have time to go back and do preventative maintenance at the rate we want, and that is starting to catch up with us. So that was one of the positions that got cut that really, in the near future, that we're going to need to look at filling. The other was a landscape position. I actually cut that before even bringing it to Hazen. That was a position I said we would need if we added the additional planters that we did to be able to keep up with watering. As you're probably well aware, we're having trouble keeping up with just mowing right now. Never mind all the other stuff that we do. We have, I think, 11 parks now that we maintain. You know, the amount of stuff that we maintain with the same personnel, it's we're starting to fray. So we will keep pushing on as best we can, but please, I'm just asking for a little forbearance when we get a little bit behind, and hopefully we'll be able to move from that next year. And that's all I have.
Thank you, CJ.
Any questions for CJ?
If I can chat for a moment, Mayor, part of this is really why we want to have that mini planning conference in October, to really start to lay out the organizational growth that we believe, as the professionals in our respective fields, that we're going to need to see the town move toward over the next 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, to be able to continue to meet the needs and the expectations of the community. And you know, a part of it is really looking at it as a system. And so one thing that we want to make sure that we don't forget are all of the internal services and departments that support these external facing departments to allow them to do their job. And I think human resources is a great example. I don't know if you had a chance to read the memo from Tanya, and she can hop in here, but it just goes to show that as we grow as an organization, there's other infrastructure that we can't forget about to make sure that we're able to be as efficient as possible in getting folks on board and getting them trained. So Tanya, if you wouldn't mind just talking for a moment about the big painful cut this year out of your budget.
Yeah, so I had asked in my budget to be able to get a HRMS system, a human resources management system. My vision with the system is truly that an employee, a person who wants to work for us applies in the system, and then we retire them out of the system. Everything is kept in one place. And I think the biggest benefit to this, I know it may appear as a nice to have, but it's really a big need. And one of the biggest pieces of this is the self-service portion of it all. It would really free up a lot of time for the HR specialist and the finance specialist with regards to the payroll activities and different things like that to do a whole lot of other projects, free up more time to hire or recruit. I can't really speak to what Beth would have the finance specialist do, but I know that she has things, in mind as well. There's a lot of time spent in very manual processes. I think the simplest example that I can give is it takes about an hour to an hour and a half to change someone's address. They submit a paper form to us, and then the HR specialist literally has to go into every single one of our benefits and into our payroll system and manually change an address. Whereas with, the system that, one of the systems that we were looking at, we were getting quotes, all three of them would be able to do direct vendor feeds. So the employee would go in, say, have an address change, that would go to either me or the HR specialist for approval. We'd say yes, it would kick off files to our vendors and it would update all that information. It would take an hour and a half process and knock it down to about 5 minutes. And that's just the simplest example that I can give of the time savings that would take place with this type of system. With a department of 2.5, because the half of the front desk is mine as well. Every minute we can save not doing a process is, time we can spend hiring employees or supporting our employees in a more meaningful way.
And what was the cost for that?
It's approximately, again, we were getting quotes, but it seems it would be around a $50,000 annual reoccurring cost and a $20,000 to $25,000 one-time startup fee.
So like Paycom?
We looked at Paycom and a couple of other competitors as well.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if Jay or Corey want to make any comments, or Beth. Corey?
I can jump in there. Like everyone has said, going into those conversations with Hazen and Becky and Beth, there were some things that we knew were going to be those either non-starters or things that would be likely, first, gone. Some examples in Squirrel Lake Park, there's an erosion problem in the playground area. Some things that we could have done in there. Continuing to activate the Matthews Mid-Hill side of Purcell Holsey Park. A lot of energy from the community to get that side of the park done. But really for me, when we walked away from the planning conference, I know I really felt energized. Thinking about the new events, the ideas, and then thinking about the community, the citizen surveys. Hung my hat on. A lot of times, what I interpreted the responses to be is when they think Matthews, they think the events and all the awesome things we have going on. Well, one thing that we could not add was a staffing person. So changing one part-time staff to a full-time, wasn't asked. But thinking about the climate we were in, certainly didn't think that adding a person when we're already talking about other, spots that we're making cuts, call it, a non-starter. And again, thinking about events as we continue to, can add to the Food Truck Fridays and the beach fests and to some degree, the participation in Matthews Alive. Right now it's just Leanne, and we've got that part-time person assisting, but it would certainly improve our service and I call it quality and level of events to move that part-time person to full-time. As an example of one of the staffing hurdles that we just simply couldn't overcome, this year. And then the rest of the items, it's the stuff. It's the, replacing carpets and some of the projects listed in our ADA transition plan, which is an entire list of projects around Matthews, not necessarily just in our department. Those were the things that we, even going into it, it was that thought, these simply probably will not make it into the budget this year.
Do you have any questions for Corey?
I saw a number of his cuts, Corey, and many of them are obvious because they're event related, of events that have been canceled, but appreciate your hard work. Sorry, it's a depressing time for Park and Rec there.
Yeah. We feel good about getting back to where we were. Simply, we're all feeling this, what's happening with COVID, but man, revenue-wise, participation-wise, we were on pace to, I'll say, set records. With, I'm talking in terms of, again, participation and revenue, and we just hit that bump, and hopefully we can get back to it.
I'm sure you can. Thank you.
Yeah, I think when we get the virus under control a little more, there's going to be a lot of people clamoring to go do parks and recreation type activities. So I think better days are coming.
Yeah. And not only that, I want to speak to your department in that it helps make Matthews more affordable as a place to live. And I appreciate all the programs that you guys provide that, are something that we as a family can afford to do, where summer camps elsewhere, we couldn't do that. So thank you for thank you for doing all of that you do. And it's hard to see those items get cut back.
Appreciate that.
Mr. Camp.
Hey, good evening, everybody. As you've seen in the memo, our budget's pretty straightforward this year. It's very much status quo, kind of piggybacking on what CJ said earlier. We've been a department of 6 for going on a little more than 15 years now. So our staffing levels are appropriate given what we've got going on in the community. Obviously, the work we do has grown much more complex. If you just look at the development projects that come before you all on a regular basis, there's a lot more to be considered. We've got a lot of folks that multitask in the department. Obviously, we've got 4 full-time planners. One of those is also would in a lot of communities be a GIS manager, but that's a split position. We also house code enforcement. Really briefly looking at the memo I provided you, I would say maybe once a decade or even more than that, we come to you with a major request because we typically do not have any sort of capital projects. If you look at most of the area plans we've done over the past decade or two, those are all done in-house. As I mentioned at the planning conference back in February, we will be kicking off the Idlewild 485 small area plan. That'll be completely in-house document done by our staff. I don't know if that's going to be the name of it, but that's the working name for it. But that last bullet point, the comprehensive plan, I know we touched on that also briefly back in February. Very, very important component for the future of the community. It's going to be an expensive component, but it's something that I feel very strongly that we need to start laying the groundwork to update. I know our plan's only 8 years old now. In a rapidly growing community like Matthews, you don't let comp plans sit on the shelf and gather dust. Charlotte somehow went 40 years between updates. I don't know how they did it, but they must have 50 area plans all over the community, but that is not a best practice. And do a Google search for Charlotte 2040. They've done some really interesting work. Davidson also recently completed, I think they're in the process of almost adopted it. It's the Davidson What's Next plan, but the main difference between the land use plan and a comp plan is it's really uniting all of the town's future aspirations and goals into one doc. So I just wanted to put that out there, kind of like fire chief, police chief did, that's something on the horizon for our department. But happy to answer any questions you have.
Commissioner Miller.
Thank you. Jay, I have one question. It's not related to the budget.
Okay.
Do you know if Carlo McCoy has reached out to TrueGuard, the owners of the lot where we approved the building and they were going to clear it? But long story short, there's a large tree laying horizontally on their property. Do you know if they plan to clean that up?
Yes, I know that some of our staff have talked to them about that. I believe that's still remnant of the tornado.
It is. When was the tornado? Does anyone remember?
Back in the good old days before COVID.
I'm thinking, I thought it was November, but it might have been January.
I know that their groundbreaking has been delayed due to COVID, but we will be happy to reach out to them and work on a plan for removal of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's been down a long time and they can blame it on COVID, but if they plan to build a building there, they're going to have to bring in heavy equipment to grade it and pull down the other trees. I just think it's irresponsible of them to not do it sooner rather than later. And it's right on John Street in our historic downtown area.
Well, we'll make a note of it and reach out to them. Thanks for the heads up on that.
Thank you, Jay.
All right. Any other questions for Mr. Camp? Beth, do you have anything you'd like to say? Beth Blair?
What I would like to say is that our budget was pretty straightforward. We didn't have a lot to be cut because there's not much in the budget other than personnel and some utilities that are paid. But I will piggyback off of what Tanya was saying, that the new HRIS system, one of the improvements that we were looking to make would be electronic timekeeping for employees, which would make things much more efficient and allow us to do more purchasing analysis to try to reduce costs across the organization was what we were hoping to benefit by freeing up our financial specialist time. So those were the key factors for the finance department.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to just make a comment that'll probably be familiar to those that have worked in the corporate world. My former boss at Apollo would most likely ask me if we purchase this system, how many employees are you going to eliminate? So I think we've all heard similar things like that. If this is going to generate lots of time savings, then surely you can do with less employees. Typical, not saying we need to do that, but that's whenever I wanted to get something that I thought was really cost savings, and especially for time efficiency, I was typically asked, well, how many employees is that going to cut? So
is that the same thing, Mayor, doing more with less?
I mean, there's
I can assure you they have plenty of other things that they can be doing that are of benefit to the town.
They're a better use of their time.
And the centralized purchasing and all that. So we won't be offering up any personnel in return. Sorry.
Well, I think it's an incredible waste of time to take an hour and a half to update someone's address, for instance. That's just
Yeah.
terrible for whoever has to do that, and it's just kind of a unfortunate waste of time. All right. Mr. Blodgett, you have anything else?
Yeah, I do have one other thing. So one of the things y'all will do at the next regular meeting is when we have scheduled to adopt the budget. You guys do not have to adopt the budget at the first meeting in June, but it will be there ready to be adopted. You'll see the budget ordinance. You'll see the budget, and you'll also see a fee schedule. And the staff is talking about if there's any amendments to the fee schedule. The only one that's been brought up to me so far is CJ would like to increase the charge we make to hang the banners. Those are time consuming. And I think the full cost to do that is around $330. CJ, do you know what we're charging right now? It's what significantly below that.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't. I think it's like $50 right now.
Yeah.
But
So that's not coming back to the board as a recommendation. I think we have to vet that a little bit, because many times the very organizations are asking for that are nonprofits themselves. It's, you know, it's not like Harris Teeter's. We wouldn't let Harris Teeter do it, but it's a, you know, we're kind of robbing Peter to pay Paul a little bit here. So I think we'll have to do a little more internal analysis before we come back to you guys. But that could be an example of a fee change we would ask the board.
Are those the Playhouse banners or the banners on the light poles?
That's right. The Playhouse banner, the over the street banners. Anybody that gets money from the town through tourism funds is eligible to put a banner up. So, and obviously those are nonprofits.
I'm having a difficult time imagining how it could possibly cost $330 to hang a banner, but I'll take you at your word. It seems like an awful lot.
Can I respond to that?
Sure.
It takes roughly an hour to hang one up and another hour to take one down. And that includes the manpower. We have traffic control. We have equipment out there, a bucket truck to do that, cones, and you know, that we do it safely.
Fair enough. We have about 15 minutes before our regular meeting starts. Becky or Hazen, do you have anything additional before we maybe can take a quick break?
I do not.
Okay.
I have a question regarding budget meetings, please.
Sure.
If our first opportunity to vote on a budget is June 8th, I believe. I don't see anything June 1st for a budget meeting before then. But I've heard reference of a potential budget meeting, and I have questions that have not been answered thus far. Can we have a budget meeting on June 1st? Or can we have one more budget meeting, even with social distancing or whatever, before we vote on it?
I would say yes. Sure. Will of the board, right?
Yeah.
So Commissioner, the only question that I have written down that's not answered, that you've at least lifted up, is what's the difference between in the police department budget between what was requested versus what was recommended? Are there other, and you can do this offline if you want to send an email or whatever, but I don't know what else we haven't answered for you.
Public Works over the last 6 years.
Okay.
Jeff, could they just answer those questions for you? I personally seen all I need to see moving forward to the June 8th meeting. But if you got questions, if they can answer your question, would that satisfy you, Jeff?
I would like to discuss changes in budget for different departments. And I feel that I would like to summarize for this board what has been increased by dollars and what has been increased by percent on a few departments. And I have my reasoning for that, but until I see the numbers, I don't feel prepared. If you're fine, that's fine, but I feel the need to debate a couple more points, and I'm not prepared to debate them tonight, honestly. I think part of this is also the handicap of Zoom and the lack of in-person meetings, the lack of ability to converse.
I don't disagree. These meetings are very awkward.
Yeah.
I think we're much, I think
When are we
we
legally allowed
we debate much better and get more input from everybody when we actually sit in the same room together rather than
Can
staring
like
at a flat screen.
in
And
phase 2, are we allowed to meet in town hall? I don't know.
we could meet. There's been some pushback by some for doing that, but government meetings are exempted, so we could meet.
Well, you remember before we shut down, you remember how we sat and we did social distancing at that last meeting that we had publicly? I would be in favor of that. And if anybody want to bring the face mask or whatever, we could do that if we need to meet in public again. But are we looking at sometime coming back together in phase 2 as a board?
I think the last that we discussed was we would perhaps have our first meeting in July in person, but there was, I thought, a general consensus not to meet in person in June. We could certainly change that if whatever the will of the board is.
I would vote to meet in June with social distancing, optional face masks. I think that the budget is, it's one of the most important things and it lasts a year long. So I feel the need to at least discuss a little further before we vote.
I'd be in favor of that.
Hazen, can we discuss this during our regular meeting at 7?
So we could add it to the agenda. That's one option, add it to the agenda. You could do it under the mayor's report.
Why don't we add it under new business and we'll just discuss it in our meeting so that.
Okay.
But it sounds like we're scheduling a work session for June 1st at 6 p.m. That's what I heard.
Something like that, sure.
All right, let's take a 5-minute break or so. And I promise to be back on in time. My computer doesn't update again, unbeknownst to me. And we'll go from there. Is that all right? Lori?
Very good.
Yep,
Thank you.
I'd just like to remind the board when we get into the 7 o'clock meeting, please mute yourselves when we get to the pledge. Only the mayor should be the one saying it out loud. Everybody else should be muted. Thank you.
Okay. See you in about 5.
You doing okay?
Well, there's Mr. Buckley. How you doing, sir?
Good evening, Mayor. How are you? Good evening, gentlemen.
Dave, you're going to do the moment of reflection, correct?